chilling weight of antique silver felt heavy in my hands, a perfect match for the heaviness in my soul. Every year, the Preston family dinner was my personal trial by fire, a performance where I prayed I'd finally earn my place. My husband, Owen, was a ghost at my side, his affection as cold as the marble floors of his ancestral home. And at the head of the table sat his father, Robert Preston, a man carved from granite and disapproval, whose silence was louder than any criticism. But this year was different. This year, my husband didn't just bring his emotional distance to dinner. He brought her. And in the wreckage of the evening, after she branded me with a word that would shatter my world, the one man I feared most would be the one to change everything. This isn't just a story of betrayal. It's a story of how a single word, meant to destroy me, ended up setting me free. The Preston estate wasn't a home, it was a statement. Sprawling across acres of manicured Connecticut countryside, the Georgian-style mansion stood as a monument to old money and generational power. Every polished floorboard, every oil painting of a grim-faced ancestor whispered a single, intimidating word. Lineage. It was a lineage I, Willa, was most certainly not a part of. My own history was written in the cracked pavement of a working-class Chicago neighborhood, filled with the scent of my mother's home-baked bread and the sound of my father's laughter. It was a world of warmth and love, but in the hallowed halls of the Preston domain, it was a liability, a background to be glossed over, an inconvenient detail in the otherwise perfect narrative of their son, Owen Preston. I had met Owen in college. He was magnetic, a whirlwind of charm and confidence that swept me off my feet. He told me he loved that I was real, that my lack of pretense was a breath of fresh air. I believed him. In my naivety, I mistook his fascination with my different world for genuine acceptance. The first 5 years of our marriage had been a slow, painful education in the truth. The realness he once cherished became a source of private embarrassment for him. My simple tastes were unrefined. My lack of connections was a social handicap. I was his pretty, presentable wife, but I was not, and would never be, a Preston. The annual Preston Family Foundation dinner was the pinnacle of my anxiety. It wasn't a warm family gathering. It was a corporate board meeting, disguised with fine china and starched linen. The guest of honor was always Robert Preston, the family patriarch. He was a man who communicated in clipped sentences and assessing glances. He had built his father's respectable investment firm into a global empire, and he ran his family with the same ruthless efficiency. His gaze made me feel like a line item on a balance sheet that was consistently underperforming. I had spent years trying to win a single, genuine smile from him, an ounce of the approval he so readily gave Owen. It never came. Owen's mother, Catherine, had passed away a decade ago, but her presence was everywhere. Her portrait, regal and severe, hung over the grand fireplace. People spoke of her with a hushed reverence. She was, by all accounts, the perfect corporate wife, impeccable, strategic, and born into the right family. She was the standard against which I was measured, and perpetually found wanting. Owen's sister, Sophie, was a younger, sharper version of her mother. Her compliments were backhanded, her smiles thin. "Oh, Willa, that's a brave color for you," she'd say, her eyes scanning my dress with a look that stripped it of any elegance I thought it had. This year, the dread felt heavier. Owen had been distant for months, a new kind of coldness settling between us. Late nights at the office became more frequent. The scent of an unfamiliar, expensive perfume clung to his suit jackets. When I'd tried to talk to him, he'd shut me down with practiced ease. "Don't be paranoid, Willa. We're just trying to close the Henderson deal. You wouldn't understand the pressure." I was in our cavernous bedroom, the size of my parents' entire first floor, fastening a pearl necklace, one of the few pieces of my own jewelry I dared to wear among the Preston diamonds. Owen walked in, already dressed in a tailored Tom Ford suit, checking his reflection in the mirror without a glance in my direction. "Is that what you're wearing?" he asked, his tone flat. I looked down at my dress. It was a deep sapphire silk, simple but elegant. I'd spent weeks choosing it. "Yes. Do you not like it?" "It's fine," he said, the word a death sentence. "Just a bit plain. Sophie is wearing Dior." He adjusted his tie, his reflection the only thing commanding his attention. "Try to be engaging tonight, all right? Talk to my Uncle Daniel about his new yacht. And for God's sake, don't mention your mother's community garden. It makes you sound provincial." Each word was a small, sharp cut. I nodded, the familiar lump forming in my throat. I was a provincial girl playing dress-up, and my costume was never quite convincing enough. "I just want tonight to go smoothly," he added, finally turning to me. For a moment I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Was it guilt? Regret? But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by the cool mask of a Preston. For my father. Of course, it was always for his father. My role was simple. Be a silent, smiling asset. Don't cause a scene. Don't be a liability. Don't give Robert Preston another reason to look at his son with disappointment and see me as the cause. As we walked down the sweeping staircase, the murmur of voices from the grand dining room below sounded like the judgment of a jury. I placed my hand on Owen's arm, seeking a sliver of connection, of partnership. His muscle was tense, unyielding. He was already 1,000,000 miles away. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and prepared to face the lions, utterly unaware that the real predator had yet to even enter the room. The dining room was a masterpiece of intimidating opulence. A long mahogany table, polished to a mirror shine, reflected the glittering chandelier above. It was set for 14, a collection of Preston siblings, cousins, and key business allies. The air was thick with the scent of expensive floral arrangements and the low hum of powerful people making polite, calculated conversation. Robert Preston sat at the head of the table, a silent king surveying his court. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his posture ramrod straight. He acknowledged our entrance with a curt nod that felt more like a dismissal. Sophie was holding court near the fireplace, laughing a little too loudly at something her husband, a blandly handsome man named Geoffrey, had said. She caught my eye, and her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Dinner began, a synchronized affair managed by a silent, efficient staff. The first course was served, a delicate lobster bisque. The conversation was stilted, a dance of veiled boasts and careful inquiries. Uncle Daniel did, in fact, talk about his new yacht. I dutifully asked the right questions, feigning an interest I couldn't possibly muster. I could feel Owen's gaze on me from across the table, monitoring my performance. For a while, it seemed like the evening might just pass without incident. Another colourless entry in the long history of Preston family dinners. We were halfway through the main course, a filet mignon that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget growing up, when the dining room doors opened. A member of the household staff, a man I recognized as Thomas, the head butler, stepped in and approached Owen, his expression a mask of professional unease. He leaned down and whispered something in Owen's ear. Owen's face, which had been set in a bored aristocratic slump, suddenly sharpened. He nodded curtly at Thomas, a strange, almost defiant glint in his eye. He stood up, dabbing his lips with his napkin. "Excuse me, everyone," he announced to the table. "I seem to have forgotten something. I'll be right back." Robert's gaze narrowed. "Forgotten what, Owen?" "Everything you need is right here." His voice was low, but it cut through the room, silencing all other conversation. "Just a document." "For you, actually, Father," Owen lied, his smoothness almost convincing. "A surprise. Won't be a moment." He walked out of the room, leaving behind confused and suspicious silence. I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. Owen was a terrible liar, and his surprise felt more like a threat. Sophie shot me a questioning look, a smirk playing on her lips as if to say, "What has your pathetic husband done now? 5 minutes stretched into an eternity." The staff began clearing the main course plates in the awkward quiet. Robert sat motionless, his fingers steepled, his eyes fixed on the empty doorway. He didn't like surprises. He didn't like deviations from the plan. And he certainly didn't like being lied to at his own table. Then, the doors opened again. Owen strode back in, but he wasn't alone. On his arm was a woman. She was everything I wasn't. Tall, impossibly slender, with a mane of fiery red hair that seemed to defy gravity. She was poured into a shimmering, emerald green dress that was cut daringly low, a stark, vivid splash of color in the muted, conservative room. Her makeup was flawless, her smile sharp and predatory. She carried herself not with the quiet deference of a guest, but with the brazen confidence of a conqueror. A collective, silent gasp seemed to suck the air from the room. I recognized her instantly from a society blog I'd scrolled past weeks ago. Giselle Lavoie, an art gallery owner with a reputation for sharp business tactics and even sharper social climbing, and, as the hushed rumors I had tried so desperately to ignore had suggested, Owen's latest obsession. My fork clattered onto my plate, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the dead silence. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just an affair. This was a declaration of war. Bringing his mistress to his family's most sacred annual dinner in front of his father, in front of me, was an act of such profound cruelty and disrespect that I couldn't fully process it. Owen, looking smugly triumphant, guided her to the empty chair beside him, the one directly across from me. He didn't even look at me. He was playing to an audience of one. His father. "Everyone," Owen said, his voice ringing with false cheerfulness. "I'd like you to meet a very dear friend of mine, Giselle Lavoie. Giselle, this is my family." Giselle's eyes, the color of jade, swept across the table, lingering for a moment on Robert with a practiced deference before landing squarely on me. Her smile widened, a calculated display of pity and victory. "It's an absolute honor to finally meet you all," she said, her voice a low, husky purr. "Owen has told me so much about you." No one moved. No one spoke. Sophie's jaw was slack with shock. Uncle Daniel looked as if he'd swallowed a fish bone. All eyes darted from Owen to the audacious woman beside him, to me, waiting for the inevitable explosion. But the most terrifying reaction was the lack of one. Robert Preston did not move a muscle. His face was a mask of cold fury, his eyes like chips of ice. He stared at his son, and in that gaze I saw a storm gathering, a tempest of wrath so profound it made the entire, magnificent room feel small and fragile, as if it could be torn apart at any moment. The uninvited guest had arrived, and with her, she had brought the apocalypse. The silence that followed Giselle's introduction was so absolute, so heavy, it felt like a physical presence in the room. It was a silence filled with the unspoken questions, the recriminations, the sheer, unadulterated shock of everyone present. It was the kind of silence that precedes a verdict. Owen, high on his own reckless audacity, seemed to be the only one immune to it. He pulled out the chair for Giselle, a gesture of chivalry so misplaced it was grotesque. She settled into it with a theatrical grace, as if taking her rightful place on a throne. "Giselle is the owner of the Lavoie Gallery downtown," Owen continued, desperately trying to fill the void with chatter. "She's been advising the firm on our corporate art acquisitions. Her eye for talent is simply unparalleled." He was trying to frame her as a business associate, a pathetic and transparent attempt to legitimize her presence. No one was buying it. The way she placed her hand on his arm, the possessive glint in her eyes, it was a performance of intimacy for everyone to see. It was Sophie who broke the spell. She let out a short, sharp laugh that was pure acid. "Owen, have you completely lost your mind?" She hissed across the table, her face a mask of disbelief and disgust. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" Owen's face hardened. "I'm introducing a guest, Sophie. Do try to have some manners." "Manners?" she shot back. "You bring this woman to Father's table, with your wife sitting right there, and you want to talk about manners?" Giselle, unfazed, simply smiled. It was a slow, deliberate curving of her lips that was more of a weapon than an expression of warmth. She picked up her wine glass, her long, crimson nails clicking against the crystal. "I understand this might be a bit unconventional," she purred, her gaze sweeping the table before settling, once again, on me. "But Owen and I believe in transparency. Hiding things is just so tiresome, don't you think, Willa?" My name on her lips felt like a violation. I couldn't find my voice. My throat was tight, my hands clenched into fists in my lap, my own nails digging into my palms. I could feel every eye in the room on me, watching me, waiting for me to shatter. I felt small and powerless, a cornered animal in a room full of predators. I looked at Owen, a silent plea in my eyes. Fix this. Say something. End this nightmare. He avoided my gaze, focusing instead on cutting a piece of his now cold steak. His cowardice was more painful than the public humiliation. He had orchestrated this entire spectacle, and now he was leaving me to face the fallout alone. The staff, caught in the crossfire, stood frozen by the walls, unsure of whether to continue service or flee. It was Robert who, with a minuscule flick of his fingers, signaled for them to continue pouring the wine. The gesture was chillingly calm. He was going to let this play out. He was watching, testing. Giselle took his cue as an invitation. For the rest of the meal, she dominated the conversation, weaving a narrative of her and Owen's perfect compatibility. She talked about the art auctions they'd attended in Geneva, the weekend trip to Napa they had planned, the inside jokes they shared. Each anecdote was a carefully aimed dart, designed to highlight everything I wasn't. She was sophisticated, worldly, and deeply enmeshed in Owen's real life, the life from which I was clearly excluded. Owen has such a brilliant mind for strategy, she said, looking at Robert directly. But it's often stifled by domestic concerns. He needs a partner who can match his ambition, who can challenge him. The implication hung heavy in the air. A partner like her, not a provincial wife who cared about community gardens. I tried to eat, but the food tasted like ash in my mouth. I could feel the pitying glances from my Uncle Daniel and the scornful ones from Sophie. I was the fool, the clueless wife whose husband was flaunting his affair at the family's most important gathering. The shame was a physical heat that spread from my chest to my face. The conversation eventually turned to the Preston Foundation's latest philanthropic project, a new wing for the city's pediatric hospital. It was a project I had poured my heart and soul into for the past year, serving as the liaison between the foundation and the hospital board. I had organized fundraisers, overseen design plans, and spent countless hours with the doctors and families. It was the one area of my life within the Preston Empire where I felt I had made a genuine contribution. Owen's uncle, a kind-faced man named George, turned to me. "Willa, I hear the fundraising gala you organized was a massive success. Broke all previous records, didn't it?" A flicker of pride broke through my haze of misery. "It went very well," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "We were very fortunate with the turnout." Before I could say more, Giselle let out a delicate, tinkling laugh. "Oh, that's adorable," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "Charity galas. It's so important for wives to have a little hobby to keep them busy, isn't it?" My head snapped up. Her words, though spoken with a smile, were a direct and brutal dismissal of my work, of the one thing that gave me a sense of purpose. Owen, seeing his opportunity to curry favor with Giselle, chimed in. "Giselle has a point. It's a nice little project, but it's hardly the lifeblood of the company, darling." That was it. The dam of my composure, already fractured, finally broke. The humiliation, the betrayal, the sting of being rendered utterly insignificant by my own husband and his mistress. It all coalesced into a single point of white-hot anger. "A little hobby," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "I spent a year working on that little project. It's going to provide life-saving care for sick children. What exactly have you contributed, Giselle, other than being an expert on art acquisitions?" The verbal slap landed. Giselle's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Her eyes flashed with venom. Owen glared at me, his expression thunderous. "You are causing a scene," his look screamed. Giselle recovered quickly, her expression hardening into a cruel smirk. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, yet carrying, whisper. "Let's be honest, Willa," she said, her eyes boring into mine. "You're a placeholder. A pretty piece of scenery Owen acquired when he was young and foolish. You don't contribute anything of real value. You don't have the breeding, the ambition, or the intellect to be a Preston. You're just here." She sat back, a look of triumph on her face. She had laid all the cards on the table, verbalizing every insecurity I had ever harbored. She had unveiled me, stripped me bare in front of the entire family, and she wasn't finished yet. The final, killing blow was still to come. The air in the room crackled with tension. Giselle's words hung there, suspended in the glittering light of the chandelier, ugly and undeniable. She had articulated the unspoken truth of my marriage, the silent judgment I had felt for years from the Preston clan. I was an outsider, a decoration, a placeholder. My own anger, which had flared so briefly, was extinguished by a fresh wave of despair. I looked to Owen, my husband, the man who had vowed to love and protect me. He sat there, stone-faced, his jaw tight. He did not defend me. He did not refute her. His silence was his consent. He agreed with her. My eyes welled with tears, hot and stinging. I refused to let them fall. I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. I lifted my chin, meeting her venomous gaze with all the strength I could muster. "You have no right," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "You know nothing about me or my marriage." Giselle laughed, a sound that was both musical and utterly devoid of warmth. "Oh, I know everything I need to know. I know Owen comes to me for intellectual conversation, for passion, for a meeting of minds. He comes to me when he needs to feel like a man. What do you offer him? A tidy house and a bland smile?" She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a low, vicious hiss that seemed to slither across the table. "Why would he want you? You're a worthless little charity case he picked up. You bring nothing to this family. You bring nothing to his life. You are and always will be completely and utterly worthless." Worthless. The word struck me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just an insult. It was a branding. It seared itself into my soul, confirming every fear, every doubt, every whisper of inadequacy I had ever had about myself. The room swam before my eyes. The faces around the table blurred into a gallery of silent judges. Sophie's smug satisfaction, Uncle Daniel's pained discomfort, and Owen's cold, impassive indifference. And then there was Robert. Throughout the entire excruciating exchange, He had remained perfectly still at the head of the table. He hadn't spoken, hadn't moved, hadn't given any indication of his thoughts. He was a statue of judgment, his face an unreadable mask of granite. All the power, all the authority resided in him. His silence was the canvas upon which this entire, humiliating scene had been painted. The single word, worthless, sucked all the remaining sound from the room. The clinking of distant dishes in the kitchen stopped. The soft hum of the air conditioning seemed to die away. There was only the ringing in my ears and the thudding of my own broken heart. This was it. The end. Owen had brought his mistress to annihilate me publicly, and she had succeeded. There was no coming back from this. My marriage was over. My life in this gilded cage was over. I was exposed, humiliated, and branded. Slowly, deliberately, Robert Preston at the head of the table placed his knife and fork down on his plate. They made a soft, definitive clink against the porcelain. The sound, as quiet as it was deafening. Every head at the table, including mine, swiveled to face him. His eyes, which had been observing the scene with a chilling detachment, now ignited with a cold, blue fire. He did not look at Giselle. He did not look at me. He fixed his gaze squarely on his son, his heir, Owen. He folded his hands on the table, his posture unchanged, yet the entire energy in the room shifted, coalescing around him. The air grew heavy, charged with an immense and terrible power. He was no longer a spectator. The judge was about to deliver his sentence. His lips parted, and for a terrifying moment I was certain he was going to agree with her. I braced myself for the final, killing blow. The one that would come from the man whose approval I had so fruitlessly craved for nearly a decade. The patriarch was about to speak, and I knew, with a gut-wrenching certainty, that his words would destroy what little of me was left. Robert Preston's voice, when it finally came, was not loud. It did not need to be. It was a low, resonant baritone, laced with steel and steeped in absolute authority. It commanded the attention of everyone in the room, silencing even the frantic beating of my own heart. "Owen," he began, his eyes still locked on his son. "Look at me." Owen, who had been staring at his plate, slowly lifted his head. His face was pale, his earlier smugness replaced by a flicker of fear. He had gambled, and he was about to find out if he had won. "For 10 years, Robert said, his voice as cold and precise as a surgeon's scalpel, "I have watched you. I have given you every advantage, every opportunity. The best schools, a position in the company you did not earn, a trust fund that could sustain a small nation. I gave you the family name, and I have watched as you have squandered every single gift." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The room was so quiet, I could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. "You mistake my silence for approval," Robert continued, his voice dropping even lower. "You think because I do not publicly dress you down, it is because I am pleased. Let me correct that misconception for you, right now. I am not pleased. I am profoundly deeply disappointed. Owen flinched as if he'd been struck. "The Henderson deal you keep taking credit for." Robert's lip curled in a sneer. "It was salvaged by the legal team after your arrogant incompetence nearly tanked the entire merger. The quarterly profits you boasted about last month were the result of market trends, not your strategy. You are a passenger in a company your grandfather built and I expanded, and you have the audacity to act like you are the one steering the ship. You are a hollow suit, Owen. An empty, entitled vessel with the Preston name stamped on the outside. The brutal, public evisceration was stunning." Sophie stared at her father, her mouth agape. This was a side of him few had ever seen. He was stripping Owen of his pride, piece by piece, in front of his entire family. Having finished with his son, Robert's icy gaze finally shifted. It swept past me and landed on Giselle. She, who had been so confident moments before, now looked small and exposed, her predatory smile gone, replaced by a look of wide-eyed shock. "And you," Robert said, his voice dripping with disdain. He didn't even honor her with her name. "You speak of value, of worth. You swan into my home, a home built on a legacy of integrity and hard work, and you dare to lecture my family on ambition? You are a parasite, a creature of opportunity who attaches herself to power, believing it makes her powerful. You are mistaken. You are nothing more than a fleeting distraction for a weak man." He dismissed her with a final, withering glance, as if she were a piece of lint to be brushed away. Then his eyes moved, and, for the first time that night, perhaps for the first time in years, they settled on me. I braced myself, but the cold fury in his expression softened, replaced by something I had never seen directed at me before. A look of quiet, profound respect. "For 7 years," he said, his voice now clear and resonant, addressed to the entire table but meant for me, "Willa has been a member of this family. She has endured the snobbery of our circle with grace. She has tolerated my son's inadequacies with a patience he has never deserved. She has never asked for anything, yet she has given a great deal." He gestured vaguely toward the room. "You all see her as quiet. You mistake her kindness for weakness. You are fools." He picked up a small, leather-bound folder that had been sitting beside his plate, which I hadn't noticed before. He opened it. "This is the quarterly report for the Preston Foundation," he announced. "Since Willow took over the community outreach and fundraising initiatives 2 years ago, a little hobby, as my son so ignorantly called it, charitable donations have increased by 40%. 40%. She has secured grants none of our salaried employees could land. She has cultivated relationships with donors who had written this family off as cold and out of touch. She did this with no budget, no staff, and no support from her husband. She did this while running your home, Owen, and managing your social obligations." He looked directly at me. "That pediatric wing at the hospital? That is not a nice little project. That is a legacy. It will have the Preston name on it, but the heart of it, the real value, will be hers." My breath hitched in my throat. Tears no longer of shame, but of overwhelming shock and a strange, burgeoning gratitude filled my eyes. He had seen me all this time. When I thought he was judging me and finding me lacking, he had been watching. He had been paying attention. He closed the folder with a sharp snap. The sound echoed the finality of his next words. "So let me be perfectly, unequivocally clear," he said, his gaze once more finding his son. "Giselle speaks of worth. The irony is excruciating, because in this room she has none. And you, Owen, have proven tonight that you have squandered yours. The only person at this table who has demonstrated true Preston values, integrity, tenacity, and intelligence, is your wife." He stood up, his tall frame commanding the space. "Owen," he said, his voice now devoid of all emotion, cold as a tomb. "As of this moment, you are suspended from the board. Your corporate accounts are frozen. You will vacate your office on Monday. You will come to my study tomorrow at 9 a.m., and we will discuss the severely diminished terms of your future. You have embarrassed this family for the last time." He then looked at Giselle. "Get out of my house." Finally he turned to me. His face was stern, but his eyes held a flicker of something that looked almost like an apology. "Willa, you will, of course, remain here. This is your home." And with that, Robert Preston, patriarch and executioner, turned and walked out of the dining room without a backward glance, leaving behind a scene of utter devastation and the faint, shimmering possibility of a new beginning. The moment the heavy dining room doors clicked shut behind Robert, the spell of his authority broke and chaos erupted. Sophie let out a choked, disbelieving sob. Uncle Daniel began muttering about the scandal. Geoffrey, Sophie's husband, was already on his phone, likely cancelling some future business lunch with Owen. Owen himself was ashen-faced, his entire body trembling with a mixture of rage and humiliation. He looked like a king who had just been dethroned in a swift, brutal coup. Giselle, for her part, was scrambling. Her mask of predatory confidence had been ripped away, revealing the panicked, calculating opportunist beneath. "Owen, do something," she hissed, grabbing his arm. "You can't let him speak to me like that, to us like that." Owen finally snapped out of his stupor. He wrenched his arm away from her and shot to his feet, his chair screeching against the polished floor. His wild, furious eyes found mine across the table. "You!" he spat, his voice a venomous whisper. "This is your fault. You did this. You turned him against me." It was so absurd, so patently false, that a bubble of hysterical laughter almost escaped me. I, the powerless wife, had somehow orchestrated the public downfall of the heir apparent at the hands of his own formidable father. The accusation was a testament to his own pathetic inability to accept responsibility. "I did nothing, Owen," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "You did this all to yourself." "Get your things," he snarled at Giselle, not even looking at her. "We're leaving." He stormed out of the room without another word. Giselle, her face a thunderous mask of fury and thwarted ambition, gave me one last look of pure hatred before following him, her stilettos clicking an angry retreat on the marble floor. The uninvited guests were gone. The remaining family members began to disperse quickly, mumbling awkward apologies and condolences in my direction. They couldn't get away fast enough. No one wanted to be near the blast zone. Soon I was left alone in the magnificent dining room, surrounded by the wreckage of my life. Half-eaten plates of exquisite food, discarded napkins, and the ghost of that single ugly word, worthless. But it no longer had the same sting. Robert's words had been a shield, a powerful antidote to her poison. I sat there for a long time, the shock slowly receding, replaced by a strange and unfamiliar calm. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't afraid. He will not be returning tonight. I looked up to see Thomas, the butler, standing by the door. His professional mask was softened by a look of genuine sympathy. Mr. Robert asked me to inform you that a suite has been prepared for you in the West Wing. Should you wish for privacy, he continued. He also asked if you would be willing to join him in his study. My heart hammered against my ribs. A summons to Robert's study. For years that had been a place of terror, the room where disappointing quarterly reports were dissected and family failures were admonished. But tonight felt different. I nodded. Thank you, Thomas. I'll be there in a moment. Robert's study was the heart of his empire, lined with floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelves, filled with leather-bound legal texts and first editions. It smelled of old paper, leather, and power. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Robert was standing by the large bay window, looking out into the dark, manicured grounds. He held a glass of what looked like scotch in his hand. He turned as I entered. Willa, thank you for coming. Please, sit. He gestured to one of the plush leather armchairs facing the fireplace. I sat down, my hands clasped nervously in my lap. He walked over and sat in the opposite chair, the firelight catching the sharp angles of his face. He was silent for a moment, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. I owe you an apology, he said finally, his voice quiet. I was so taken aback I could only stare at him. An apology? For what? For allowing my son's behavior to escalate to this point. For my own neglect, he said, his gaze direct and unflinching. I saw his weakness, his lack of character, for years. I hoped marriage to a woman of substance, a woman like you, would temper it, strengthen him. I was wrong. It is not a spouse's duty to build a man's spine for him. He took a sip of his scotch. I also apologize for my distance, my coldness. It was not personal. After my wife, Catherine, passed, I buried myself in work. I closed myself off. It is no excuse, but it is the truth. I judged you unfairly in the beginning because you were not like her. It took me far too long to realize that your strength is simply of a different kind. Quieter, but no less formidable. He looked into the fire, a flicker of old grief in his eyes. Catherine was the true architect of this family's success. She was brilliant, fierce. She came from nothing, like you. She fought for her place here. She saw through people's pretenses and valued only one thing: integrity. She would have despised what Owen has become, but she would have admired you. The compliment, so unexpected and so profound, struck me to my core. To be compared favorably to the sainted Catherine Preston was something I had never imagined possible. "Tonight," he continued, turning back to me, "you were faced with a vile and humiliating attack. You could have screamed, you could have run, you could have dissolved into tears. You did none of those things. You stood your ground. You found your voice. You showed the steel I had only glimpsed before." He leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. "Owen has made his choice. He has chosen a path of deceit and weakness. Now, you have a choice to make." He paused. "The best lawyers in the state are on my personal retainer. They will be at your disposal tomorrow morning. They will ensure you receive a divorce settlement so generous that Owen will be paying for tonight's dinner for the rest of his miserable life. Your home here is secure. You will want for nothing." He held up a hand. "But that is the easy path. A comfortable, gilded cage. Not so different from the one you've been living in. I am proposing another option." My breath caught. "I have seen your work with the Foundation," he said. "Your reports are meticulous. Your strategies are insightful. You have a natural talent for negotiation and a genuine empathy that connects with people, a skill that is priceless and cannot be taught. Owen has proven he is unfit to take a leadership role in this company. The position of executive director of the Preston Foundation is, as of tonight, vacant. It comes with a full staff, a significant operating budget, and a seat on the corporate advisory board. It is a real position, Willa, a demanding one, and it's yours if you want it." I was speechless. He wasn't just offering me a safety net. He was offering me a lifeline, a career, a position of real power and influence. He was offering me a chance to build my own life on my own terms, with his full backing. "Why?" I finally whispered. "Why would you do this for me?" Robert Preston looked at me, and for the first time, I saw not the fearsome patriarch or the ruthless CEO, but a man looking to secure his legacy, a legacy his own son had proven unworthy of. "Because," he said, his voice imbued with a quiet finality, "you have proven you are worthy of the Preston name, far more so than my own son. This family, this company, needs integrity at its heart. It needs you." In the warm glow of the firelight, a new alliance was forged, not of marriage or of blood, but of mutual respect. The aftershock of the evening had settled, and in its place, a foundation for a new future, my future, was being laid. The 6 months that followed the dinner were a whirlwind of deconstruction and rebuilding. My old life was dismantled with the swift, merciless efficiency of a controlled demolition, while the blueprints for a new one were drawn up under the watchful eye of my unlikely mentor, Robert Preston. The divorce was as brutal and swift as Robert had promised. Owen, stripped of his corporate resources and faced with Robert's personal legal team, was utterly outmatched. He tried to fight, of course. His first move was to try and paint me as a gold-digging manipulator who had schemed to turn his father against him. It was a narrative so laughable in the face of his public actions that it gained no traction. His lawyers, quickly realizing they were fighting a war with no ammunition and no funding, advised him to settle. The terms were devastating for him. He lost his claim to our marital home, his position at the company was officially terminated, and a significant portion of his personal trust was diverted to me as part of the settlement. He was left with a fraction of his former wealth and a reputation that was utterly shattered. Giselle, upon learning that her charismatic, powerful lover was now essentially an unemployed pariah living off a diminished allowance, vanished from his life as quickly as she had appeared. The last I heard, she had moved to London, already on the hunt for a new patron. Owen's attempts to reconcile were pathetic. He sent pleading texts, left rambling voicemails. He even showed up at the estate one afternoon, his eyes bloodshot, begging me to take him back to talk to his father for him. Looking at him then, stripped of his bespoke suit and arrogant swagger, I didn't feel anger or even pity. I felt nothing. The man I had loved, or the man I thought I'd loved, was gone. In his place was a weak, hollow stranger, and he no longer had any power over me. I had the security guards escort him from the property and changed my number the next day. While Owen's world crumbled, mine was being built on a foundation of solid rock. I accepted Robert's offer, and on my first day as the executive director of the Preston Foundation, I walked into an office with my name on the door. It was terrifying and exhilarating. Robert was a demanding but brilliant teacher. He didn't coddle me, he challenged me. He spent hours with me each week, poring over financial statements, dissecting investment strategies, and teaching me the intricate dance of corporate politics. Never let them see you sweat, he'd advise before a major board meeting. Know your numbers better than anyone else in the room. Your competence will be your armor. He was right. In the beginning, I faced skepticism from the old guard on the board, men who saw me as the patriarch's pet project. But I worked relentlessly. I knew every line item of my budget, every detail of every proposal. I presented a 5-year strategic plan for the foundation that was ambitious, but backed by unassailable data. I expanded our initiatives from local charity to national programs, focusing on educational scholarships for underprivileged youth. An issue deeply personal to me. Slowly, respect began to replace skepticism. The condescending pats on the arm were replaced with firm handshakes. My relationship with Robert transformed. The fear I once had for him was replaced by a deep, abiding affection and respect. He became the father figure I never knew I needed. We had dinner together twice a week, not in the cavernous formal dining room, but in the small, warm library. We'd talk for hours, not just about work, but about books, politics, and our lives. I learned about the boy who grew up in the shadow of a demanding father, and he learned about the girl who dreamed of a world beyond her Chicago neighborhood. He filled the void of a distant father-in-law, and in some small way, I think I helped ease the loneliness of a widower let down by his only son. Sophie, surprisingly, came around. After witnessing her brother's spectacular self-destruction and my subsequent rise, her animosity had curdled into a grudging respect. She saw that I wasn't a threat to her position, but an asset to the family's legacy. One afternoon, she came to my office, and in a rare moment of vulnerability, She apologized for her years of coldness. It was the beginning of a tentative but genuine friendship. One crisp autumn evening, about a year after that fateful dinner, I was the guest of honor at a gala celebrating the grand opening of the Preston-funded pediatric wing of the hospital. I stood at the podium, looking out at a sea of faces. Donors, doctors, community leaders, and in the front row, Robert and Sophie. I wore a shimmering silver dress, a color I had chosen myself, feeling not brave, but confident. I spoke about the power of community, about the responsibility of wealth, and about giving a voice to those who have none. My voice didn't shake. I felt a sense of purpose so profound it was almost overwhelming. As I finished my speech, the room erupted in a standing ovation. My eyes found Robert's in the crowd. He wasn't smiling his usual, reserved smile. He was beaming, his face filled with a pride so pure and so powerful, it felt like a physical embrace from across the room. Later that evening, he found me on a quiet terrace overlooking the city lights. "Catherine would have been so proud of you tonight, Willa," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Robert," I said, my heart full, for everything. For believing in me when I didn't even believe in myself. "I didn't give you your worth, Willa," he said, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "I just cleared the way so you could see it for yourself. You were never worthless. You were a phoenix, sleeping in the ashes. You just needed a reason to fly." I looked out at the glittering city, a landscape of infinite possibilities. The gilded cage was a distant memory. The cruel words of a bitter woman were nothing but a faint echo. I was not Willa, the provincial wife. I was not Willa, the charity case. I was Willa Preston, not by marriage, but by merit. I was the director of the foundation. I was a friend, a leader, and a woman who had finally, unequivocally, found her own worth. And I was just getting started. Willa's journey is a powerful testament to the fact that our worth is never defined by the cruel words of others, but by our own resilience and integrity. That single, horrible night, which was meant to be her ultimate humiliation, became her liberation. It stripped away a toxic marriage and revealed an unexpected ally who saw the strength she had all along. She transformed from a wife silenced by insecurity into a woman leading with purpose, proving that the most powerful revenge is not loud and vengeful, but quiet, competent, and undeniable success. Her story is a reminder that sometimes our greatest champions appear in the most unexpected forms, and our deepest wounds can become the source of our greatest strength. What did you think of Robert's reaction? Was it the perfect act of justice for Owen and Giselle? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were cheering for Willa's incredible comeback, please hit the like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear a story of empowerment. And don't forget to subscribe for more unforgettable stories of betrayal, justice, and ultimate triumph.